Hello, everybody, and welcome to TED Talks. I'm Bonnie Edes. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get into three very interesting topics today: the human brain, underwater beauty, and also the bond of friendship. But first, let's take a look at TED. Who is TED? What is TED? And how did TED get started? TED began in 1984, and it was out of the imagination of a gentleman by the name of Richard Saul Wurman, who is a certified genius. I don't think his brain ever stops thinking. Um, he started this as a conference where technology, education, and design converged, therefore getting the acronym TED, technology, education, and design. He saw that there was a confluence of these three areas coming together and was absolutely enamored with what the possibilities could be in all of these different areas. TED is a nonprofit organization devoted to spreading these ideas, usually, as you'll see in this, short, powerful talks. There we go, TED Talks. These are videos created from a presentation that are done at the main TED technology conferences, which started in Monterey, California. But because this yearly conference was such a big hit, these conferences have spread all over the world, different types of events, both short and long lectures, as well as every possible imagine you can think of, science to business to global issues, and they're in over 100 languages. So needless to say, the TED Talks have been spreading wildly across the country, nationwide and internationally, on so many different subjects. And so we're going to talk a little bit about who is Richard Saul Wurman. He is, as I said earlier, really a certified genius. It's hard to even say how he thinks and what he thinks because his ideas are so abstract and how he brings them together. He was born in Philadelphia. He's 85 years old, went to the University of Pennsylvania. He is an architect by trade, architect and graphic designer. He has done over 90 books. He and his wife live in Golden Beach, Florida. His wife is novelist Gloria Nagy, and they have 2 pet dogs, 4 children, and 6 grandchildren. And yet he still finds ways to come up with new ideas, which he's working on now on some new projects. But listen to him. Let's hear his thoughts on why he started TED.
I like being around people smarter than I am. I don't like being around dummies. I'm often asked, how did you come up with the idea of the TED conference? I saw there was a convergence, and the convergence was between the technology business, the entertainment industry, and the design professions. And when they did projects that I thought were okay, they always involved the others. And nobody saw that they were really one business. And so I thought, well, let me celebrate that. Let me see if I'm right, that they need each other to do good work. And I flipped around the letters. I wrote TED, and I thought, well, that's cute. I can give away teddy bears, and it's a funny word. And so I did a TED conference. And what was it? How was it different? Since 1970, I had been fascinated with the idea of gatherings. Every conference that I saw was made up of the same pieces, out of the same set of blocks. Everyone was made up of panels of rich white people, men in suits, with lecterns, with long introductions, long speeches, save seats in the front row for sponsors and the other speakers. Boring, and a place near a golf course. I tried to change the rules, but I realized that TED was innovation by subtraction. I decided to make short speeches, the 18-minute speech, famous 18-minute speech. No introductions. I would just say, come on up here, Herbie. Because they had it in a program, they could read it. They didn't need me to read it to them. And that by changing those things and by changing the fact that it wasn't on one subject, like one kind of law, one kind of tax law, or eye, ear, nose, and throat specialist, but on almost everything. Now I'm trying to take it a couple steps further and celebrate what I think is the essence of meeting and greeting and talking and ideas and communication, which is the conversation. If it works, very soon there will be hundreds of conferences doing that. And they should. It's an idea that nobody owns. You should do it if it works. If it doesn't work, they'll go a different direction. And that's okay too.
What a mind. We're going to move on to our first segment. And the first segment is just a beautiful, beautiful piece done by British sculptor Jason de Taylor. He's a sculptor and creator of the world's first underwater sculpture park, the Molinari Underwater Sculpture Park and Museum. He's best known for installing site-specific underwater sculptures, which develop into these beautiful artificial coral reefs, integrating his skills as a sculptor, marine conservationist, underwater photographer. His works in Grenada have been listed among the top 25 wonders of the world by National Geographic. And of course, he's done other projects as well. The world's largest underwater sculpture museum, the Cancun Underwater Museum, is off the coast of Cancun in Isla de Mujeres in Mexico. And the Ocean Atlas, which was done in 2014, it's a 60-ton sculpture off of the Bahamas currently, and he's been working on it since, I believe, 2016, off the island of Lanzarote, Spain. He's working on a new underwater museum for the Atlantic Ocean. This is a beautiful, beautiful view of underworld photography. If you're a scuba diver, boy, would these be some fantastic underwater trips to go see. So enjoy the beauty of the Underwater Museum and Sculptures of Jason de Taylor.
Ten years ago, I had my first exhibition here. I had no idea if it would work or was at all possible, but with a few small steps and a very steep learning curve, I made my first sculpture called The Lost Correspondent. Teaming up with a marine biologist and a local dive center, I submerged the work off the coast of Grenada in an area decimated by Hurricane Ivan. And then this incredible thing happened. It transformed. One sculpture became two. Two quickly became 26. And before I knew it, we had the world's first underwater sculpture park. In 2009, I moved to Mexico and started by casting local fishermen. This grew to a small community, to almost an entire movement of people in defense of the sea, and then finally to an underwater museum with over 500 living sculptures. Gardening, it seems, is not just for greenhouses. We've since scaled up the designs. Ocean Atlas in the Bahamas, rising 16 feet up to the surface and weighing over 40 tons. To now, currently in Lanzarote, where I'm making an underwater botanical garden, the first of its kind in the Atlantic Ocean. Each project, we use materials and designs that help encourage life. A long-lasting pH-neutral cement provides a stable and permanent platform. It is textured to allow coral polyps to attach. We position them down current from natural reefs so that after spawning, there's areas for them to settle. The formations are all configured so that they aggregate fish on a really large scale. Even this VW beetle has an internal living habitat to encourage crustaceans such as lobsters and sea urchins. So why exhibit my work in the ocean? Because honestly, it's really not easy. When you're in the middle of the sea, under a 100-foot crane, trying to lower 8 tons down to the sea floor, you start to wonder whether I shouldn't have taken up watercolor painting instead. But in the end, the results always blow my mind. The ocean is the most incredible exhibition space an artist could ever wish for. You have amazing lighting effects, changing by the hour, explosions of sand covering the sculptures in a cloud of mystery, a unique timeless quality, and a procession of inquisitive visitors, each lending their own special touch to the site. But over the years, I've realized that the greatest thing about what we do, the really humbling thing about the work, is that as soon as we submerge the sculptures, they're not ours anymore. Because as soon as we sink them, the sculptures, they belong to the sea. As new reefs form, a new world literally starts to evolve, a world that continuously amazes me. It's a bit of a cliche, but nothing man-made can ever match the imagination of nature. Sponges look like veins across the faces. Staghorn coral morphs the form. Fireworms scrawl white lines as they feed. Tunicates explode from the faces. Sea urchins crawl across the bodies feeding at night. Coralline algae applies a kind of purple paint. The deepest red I've ever seen in my life lives underwater. Gorgonian fans oscillate with the waves. Purple sponges breathe water like air. And grey angelfish glide silently overhead. And the amazing response we've had to these works tells me that we've managed to plug into something really primal, because it seems that these images translate across the world, and that's made me focus on my responsibility as an artist and about what I'm trying to achieve. I'm standing here today on this boat in the middle of the ocean, and this couldn't be a better place to talk about the really, really important effect of my work. Because as we all know, our reefs are dying and our oceans are in trouble. So here's the thing, the most used, searched, and shared image of all my work thus far is this. And I think this is for a reason, or at least I hope it is. What I really hope is that people are beginning to understand that when we think of the environment and the destruction of nature, that we need to start thinking about our oceans too. Since building these sites, we've seen some phenomenal and unexpected results. Besides creating over 800 square meters of new habitats and living reef, visitors to the marine park in Cancun now divide half their time between the museum and the natural reefs, providing significant rest for natural, overstressed areas. Visitors to Ocean Atlas in the Bahamas highlighted a leak from a nearby oil refinery. The subsequent international media forced the local government to pledge $10 million in coastal cleanups. The sculpture park in Grenada was instrumental in the government designating the spot a marine protected area. Entrance fees to the park now help fund park rangers to manage tourism and fishing quotas. The site was actually listed as a wonder of the world by National Geographic. So why are we all here today in this room? What do we all have in common? I think we all share a fear that we don't protect our oceans enough. And one way of thinking about this is that we don't regard our oceans as sacred, and we should. When we see incredible places like the Himalayas or the Sagrada Familia or the Mona Lisa even, when we see these incredible places and things, we understand their importance. We call them sacred, and we do our best to cherish them, to protect them, and to keep them safe. But in order to do that, we are the ones that have to assign that value. Otherwise, they'll be desecrated by someone who doesn't understand that value. So I want to finish up tonight by talking about sacred things. When we were naming the site in Cancun, we named it a museum for a very important and simple reason. Museums are places of preservation, of conservation, and of education. They're places where we keep objects of great value to us, where we simply treasure them for them being themselves. If someone was to throw an egg at the Sistine Chapel, we'd all go crazy. If someone wanted to build a 7-star hotel at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, then we would laugh them out of Arizona. Yet every day, we dredge, pollute, and overfish our oceans. And I think it's easier for us to do that because when we see the ocean, we don't see the havoc we're wrecking. Because most people, the ocean is like this. And it's really hard to think of something that's just so plain and so enormous as fragile. It's simply too massive, too vast, too endless. And what do you see here? I think most people actually look past to the horizon. So I think there's a real danger that we never really see the sea. And if we don't really see it, if it doesn't have its own iconography, if we miss its majesty, then there's a big danger that we take it for granted. Cancun is famous for spring break, tequila and foam parties, and its waters are where frat boys can ride around on jet skis and banana boats. But because of our work there, there's now a little corner of Cancun that is simply precious for being itself. And we don't want to stop in Grenada, in Cancun, or the Bahamas. Just last month, I installed these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the Thames River in central London, right in front of the Houses of Parliament, putting a stark message about climate change in front of the people that have the power to help change things. Because for me, this is just the beginning of the mission. We want to team up with other inventors, creators, philanthropists, educators, biologists to see better futures for our oceans. And we want to see beyond sculpture, beyond art even. Say you're a 14-year-old kid from the city and you've never seen the ocean, and instead of getting taken to the Natural History Museum or an aquarium, you get taken out to the ocean, to an underwater Noah's Ark, which you can access through a dry glass viewing tunnel, where you could see all the wildlife of the land be colonized by the wildlife of the ocean. Clearly, it would blow your mind. So let's think big and let's think deep. Who knows where our imaginations and willpower can lead us? I hope that by bringing our art into the ocean, that not only do we take advantage of amazing creativity and visual impact of the setting, that we're also giving something back. And by encouraging new environments to thrive, and in some way opening up a new, or maybe it's a really old way of seeing the seas as delicate, precious places worthy of our protection. Our oceans are sacred. Thank you.
Well, you have to really love the ocean. I do. That's the place that I'm the happiest. One of these days, I'm going to go back to scuba diving when all this is over. But moving on, we're going to talk about the brain. Alan Jones is a PhD and president and CEO of a Seattle-based institution called the Allen Institute for Brain Science. It's an independent, nonprofit resource organization, and if the name Allen might sound familiar to you, the money comes from funding by Paul Allen, who is one of the original founders with Bill Gates with Microsoft. He's putting his money into this institute, independently funding it. He did so in 2003. And the Science Institute is dedicated to answering some of the biggest questions in bioscience and accelerating research worldwide on the understanding of how the human brain works. So Paul Allen hired Alan Jones to oversee this project. Now, the Allen Institute currently encompasses 4 units: the Allen Institute for Brain Science, which is what we're going to take a look at today, the Allen Institute for Cell Science, and the Allen Institute for Immunology, and the Paul G. Allen Frontiers Group. So those are the different units. But today, as I said, we're going to take a look at the mapping of the human brain as discussed in this TED Talk by Alan Jones, who is the president and CEO of the Allen Institute for Brain Science. I think you'll enjoy this one.
Humans have long held a fascination for the human brain. We chart it, we've described it, we've drawn it, we've mapped it. Now, just like the physical maps of our world that have been highly influenced by technology, think Google Maps, think GPS, the same thing is happening for brain mapping, true transformation. So let's take a look at the brain. Most people, when they first look at a fresh human brain, they say it doesn't look like what you're typically looking at when someone shows you a brain. Typically what you're looking at is a fixed brain, it's gray, and this outer layer, this is the vasculature, which is incredible around the human brain. This is the blood vessels. 20% of the oxygen coming from your lungs, 20% of the blood pumped from your heart is servicing this one organ. That's basically, if you hold two fists together, it's just slightly larger than the two fists. Scientists sort of in the end of the 20th century learned that they could track blood flow to map non-invasively where activity was going on in the human brain. So for example, they can see in the back part of the brain, which is just turning around there, there's the cerebellum. That's keeping you upright right now. It's keeping me standing. It's involved in coordinated movement. On the side here, this is the temporal cortex. This is the area where primary auditory processing, so you're hearing my words, you're sending it up into higher language processing centers. Towards the front of the brain is the place in which all of the sort of more complex thought, decision-making is the last to mature, sort of late adulthood. This is where all your decision-making processes are going on. It's the place where you're deciding right now you probably aren't going to order the steak for dinner. So if you take a deeper look at the brain, one of the things, if you look at it in cross-section, what you can see is that you can't really see a whole lot of structure there, but there's actually a lot of structure there. It's cells and it's wires all wired together. So about 100 years ago, some scientists invented a stain that would stain cells, and that's shown here. In the very light blue, you can see areas where neuronal cell bodies are being stained. And what you can see is it's very non-uniform. You see a lot more structure there. So the outer part of that brain is the neocortex. It's one sort of continuous processing unit, if you will. But you can also see things underneath there as well. And all of these blank areas are the areas in which the wires are running through. They're probably less cell dense. So there's about 86 billion neurons in our brain. And as you can see, they're very non-uniformly distributed. And how they're distributed really contributes to their underlying function. And of course, as I mentioned before, since we can now start to map brain function, we can start to tie these into the individual cells. So let's take a deeper look. Let's look at neurons. So as I mentioned, there are 86 billion neurons. There are also these smaller cells, as you'll see. These are support cells, astrocytes, glia. And the nerves themselves are the ones who are receiving input. They're storing it. They're processing it. Each neuron is connected via synapses to up to 10,000 other neurons in your brain. And each neuron itself is largely unique. The unique character of both individual neurons and neurons within a collection of the brain are driven by fundamental properties of their underlying biochemistry. These are proteins. They're proteins that are controlling things like ion channel movement. They're controlling who nervous system cells partner up with. And they're controlling basically everything that the nervous system has to do. So if we zoom in to even deeper level, all of those proteins are encoded by our genomes. We each have 23 pairs of chromosomes. We get one from mom, one from dad, and on these chromosomes are roughly 25,000 genes. They're encoded in the DNA, and the nature of a given cell driving its underlying biochemistry is dictated by which of these 25,000 genes are turned on and at what level they're turned on. And so our project is seeking to look at this readout, understanding which of these 25,000 genes is turned on. So in order to undertake such a project, we obviously need brains. So we sent our lab technician out. We were seeking normal human brains. What we actually start with is a medical examiner's office. This is a place where the dead are brought in. We are seeking normal human brains. There's a lot of criteria by which we're selecting these brains. We want to make sure that we have normal human between the ages of 20 to 60. They died a somewhat natural death with no injury to the brain, no history of psychiatric disease, no drugs on board. We do a toxicology workup. And we're very careful about the brains that we do take. We're also selecting for brains in which we can get the tissue, we can get consent to take the tissue within 24 hours of time of death. Because what we're trying to measure, the RNA, which is the readout from our genes, is very labile, and so we have to move very quickly. One side note on the collection of brains, because of the way that we collect and because we're requiring consent, we actually have a lot more male brains than female brains. Males are much more likely to die accidental death in the prime of their life, and men are much more likely to have their significant other spouse give consent than the other way around. So the first thing that we do at the site of collection is we collect what's called an MR. This is magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. It's a standard template by which we're going to hang the rest of this data. So we collect this MR, and you can think of this as our satellite view for our map. The next thing we do is we collect what's called the diffusion tensor imaging. This maps the large cabling in the brain. And again, you can think of this as almost mapping our interstate highways, if you will. The brain is removed from the skull, and then it's sliced into 1 centimeter slices. And those are frozen solid, and they're shipped to Seattle. And in Seattle, we take these, this is a whole human hemisphere, and we put them into what's basically a glorified meat slicer. There's a blade here that's going to cut across the section of the tissue and transfer it to a microscope slide. We're going to then apply one of those stains to it, and we scan it. And then what we get is our first mapping. So this is where our experts come in and they make basic anatomic assignments. You could consider this state boundaries, if you will, those pretty broad outlines. From this, we're able to then fragment that brain into further pieces, which then we can put on a smaller cryostat. And this is just showing this here, this frozen tissue, and it's being cut. This is 20 microns thin, so this is about a baby hair's width. And remember, it's frozen, and so you can see here old-fashioned technology of a paintbrush being applied. We'd take a microscope slide, and we very carefully melt onto this slide. This will then go into a robot that's going to apply one of those stains to it. Okay. And our anatomists are going to go in and take a deeper look at this. So again, this is what they can see under the microscope. You can see collections and configurations of large and small cells in clusters in various places. And from their expertise, they understand where to make these assignments, and they can make basically what's a reference atlas. This is a more detailed map. Our scientists then use this to go back to another piece of that tissue and do what's called laser scanning microdissection. So the technician takes the instructions, they scribe along a place there, and then the laser actually cuts. You can see the blue dot there cutting, and that tissue falls off. You can see on the microscope slide here, that's what's happening in real time. There's a container underneath that's collecting that tissue. We take that tissue, we purify the RNA out of it using some basic technology, and then we put a fluorescent tag on it. We take that tagged material and we put it onto something called a microarray. Now, this may look like a bunch of dots to you, but each one of these individual dots is actually a unique piece of the human genome that we spotted down on glass. This has roughly 60,000 elements on it, so we repeatedly measure various genes of the 25,000 genes in the genome, and when we take a sample and we hybridize it to it, we get a unique fingerprint, if you will, quantitatively of what genes are turned on in that sample. Now we do this over and over again. This process for any given brain, we're taking over 1,000 samples for each brain. This area shown here is an area called the hippocampus. It's involved in learning and memory, and it contributes to about 70 samples of those 1,000 samples. So each sample gives us about 50,000 data points with repeat measurements, 1,000 samples. So roughly we have 50 million data points for a given human brain. We've done right now 2 human brains worth of data. We've put all of that together into one thing, and I'll show you what that synthesis looks like. It's basically a large data set of information that's all freely available to any scientist around the world. They don't even have to log in to come use this tool, mine this data, find interesting things out with this. So here's the modalities that we put together. You'll start to recognize these things from what we've collected before. Here's the MR. It provides the framework. There's an operator side on the right that allows you to turn. It allows you to zoom in. It allows you to highlight individual structures. But most importantly, we're now mapping into this anatomic framework, which is a common framework for people to understand, where genes are turned on. So the red levels are where a gene is turned on to a great degree. Green is the sort of cool areas where it's not turned on. And each gene gives us a fingerprint. And remember that we've assayed all the 25,000 genes in the genome and have all of that data available. So what can scientists learn about this data? And we're just starting to look at this data ourselves. There's some basic things that you would want to understand. Two great examples are drugs, Prozac and Wellbutrin. These are commonly prescribed antidepressants. Now remember, we're assaying genes. Genes send the instructions to make proteins. Proteins are targets for drugs. So drugs bind to proteins and either turn them off, et cetera. So if you want to understand the action of drugs, you want to understand how they're acting in the ways you want them to, and also in the ways you don't want them to, in the side effect profile, et cetera. You want to see where those genes are turned on. And for the first time, we can actually do that. We can do that in multiple individuals since we've assayed two. So now we can look throughout the brain, we can see this unique fingerprint, and we get confirmation. We get confirmation that indeed the gene is turned on for something like Prozac in serotonergic structures, things that are already known to be affected, but we get to see the whole thing. We also get to see areas that no one has ever looked at before, and we see these genes turned on there. Is this interesting side effects? It could be. One other thing you can do with such a thing is you can, because it's a pattern matching exercise, because there's a unique fingerprint, we can actually scan through the entire genome and find other proteins that show a similar fingerprint. So if you're in drug discovery, for example, you can go through an entire listing of what the genome has on offer to find perhaps better drug targets and optimize. Most of you are probably familiar with genome-wide association studies in the form of people covering in the news saying scientists have recently discovered the gene or genes which affect X. And so these kinds of studies are routinely published by scientists, and they're great. They analyze large populations, they look at their entire genomes, and they try to find hotspots of activity that are linked causally to genes. But what you get out of such an exercise is simply a list of genes. It tells you the what, but it doesn't tell you the where. And so it's very important for those researchers that we've created this resource. Now they can come in and they can start to get clues about activity. They can start to look at common pathways, other things that they simply haven't been able to do before. So I think this audience in particular can understand the importance of individuality. And I think every human, we all have different genetic backgrounds. We all have lived separate lives. But the fact is, our genomes are greater than 99% similar. We're very, very similar at the genetic level. And what we're finding is actually, even at the brain biochemical level, we are quite similar. And so this shows it's not 99%, but it's roughly 90% correspondence at a reasonable cutoff. So everything in the cloud is sort of roughly correlated. And then we find some outliers, some things that lie beyond the cloud. And those genes are interesting, but they're very subtle. So I think it's just an important message to take home today, that even though we celebrate all of our differences, we are quite similar even at the brain level. And what do those differences look like? This is an example of a study that we did to follow up and see what exactly those differences were. And they're quite subtle. These are things where genes are turned on in an individual cell type. These are two genes that we found that as good examples. One is called relin. It's involved in early developmental cues. DISC1 is a gene that's deleted in schizophrenia. These aren't schizophrenic individuals, but they do show some population variation. And so what you're looking at here in donor 1 and donor 4, which are the exceptions to the other two, that genes are being turned on in a very specific subset of cells. It's this dark purple precipitate within the cell that's telling us a gene is turned on there. Whether or not that's due to the individual's genetic background or their experiences, we don't know. Those kinds of studies require much larger populations. So I'm going to leave you with a final note about the complexity of the brain and how much more we have to go. I think these resources are incredibly valuable. They give researchers a handle on where to go, but we've only looked at a handful of individuals at this point. We're certainly going to be looking at more. I'll just close by saying that the tools are there, and this is truly an unexplored, undiscovered continent. This is the new frontier, if you will. And so for those who are undaunted but humbled by the complexity of the brain, the future awaits. Thanks.
What few people know about me is that I'm really a science geek, and I'm proud to say science geek, even though I've spent so many years in broadcasting and government and whatnot. My hobby is biology. But we're going to move on now to our last segment. And this is one that's filled with fondness, kindness, and the camaraderie, and how important camaraderie is in keeping our lives on track for a long and happy life. It's a sense of community. Research has shown that the sense of community is so very vital, important to longevity. It's right now a little bit difficult for us all to have that camaraderie, but we do reach out to one another, hopefully by phone, by email. And this is a great segment by two fabulous women that met in 1977 backstage of the Broadway show Appearing Nightly. Now, before Lily Tomlin even crossed paths with her Grace and Frankie co-star, which if you haven't seen that show, you must check it out. She was captivated after she saw Fonda in the 1971 hit film Clue, which is where Jane Fonda won her first Academy Award. Lily Tomlin said, "I've been a fan of hers since before I met her." Tomlin told the Washington Post this in 2017. "I had a Clute hairdo for about 2 years after I saw the movie and just fell madly for her. I cut my hair to go just like she wore it." The two went on to, they hadn't met until later on in 1977, which was 6 years later, when they met backstage at that performance of Appearing Nightly, which was showing at the Hamanson Theater in Los Angeles. Tomlin told the Post that, "Next thing I knew, she asked me," she being Jane Fonda, backstage at the theater, "she just asked me if I wanted to be in the movie 9 to 5. You remember that one? Well, we've been friends ever since. We're friends because I just love her," said Tomlin. "I know that Jane has my back wherever she can." So please enjoy this last segment on friendship, camaraderie. Enjoy.
So I was thinking about female friendship a lot. And by the way, these two women, I'm very honored to say, have been my friends for a very long time, too.
Yes, we have.
One of the things that I read about female friendship is something that Cervantes said. He said, you can tell a lot about someone, in this case a woman, by the company that she keeps. So let's start with...
We're in big trouble.
I need one of those waters. I'm extremely dry.
You're taking up our time. We have a very limited...
Just being with her sucks the life out of me.
You ain't seen nothing yet. Anyway, sorry.
Tell me, what do you look for in a friend?
I look for someone who has a sense of fun, who's audacious, who's forthcoming, who has politics, who has even a small scrap of passion for the planet, someone who's decent, has a sense of justice, and who thinks I'm worthwhile.
You know, I was thinking this morning, I don't even know what I would do without my women friends. I mean, I have my friends, therefore I am. No, it's true. I exist because I have my women friends. You're one of them. I don't know about you, but anyway, they make me stronger. They make me smarter. They make me braver. They tap me on the shoulder when I might be in need of course correcting. And most of them are a good deal younger than me too. You know, I mean, it's nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I do. I include you in that because, listen, you know, it's nice to have somebody still around to play with and learn from when you're getting toward the end.
I'm glad.
And I'm
glad
approaching. I'll be there sooner than you.
I'm glad to have you parallel aging alongside me.
I'm showing you the way. No,
Well, you are, and you have.
Yeah.
Well, as we grow older and as we go through different kinds of life's journeys, what do you do to keep your friendships vital and alive?
Well, you have to use a lot
She
of
doesn't invite me over much, I'll tell you that.
I have to use a lot of social media. You be quiet now. And so I look through my emails, I look through my texts to find my friends so I can answer them as quickly as possible because I know they need my counsel. They need my support because most of my friends are writers or activists or actors, and you're all three, and a long string of other descriptive phrases. And I want to get to you as soon as possible. I want you to know that I'm there for you.
Do you do emojis?
Oh,
No?
that's embarrassing.
I'm really into emojis.
No, I spell out my words of happiness and congratulations and sadness.
You spell it right out there.
I spell it every letter.
Such a purist. You know, as I've gotten older, I've understood more the importance of friendships, and so I really make an effort to reach out and make play dates, not let too much time go by. I read a lot, so as Lily knows all too well, I send my books that I like, I send to my friends.
When we knew we would be here today, you sent me a lot of books about women, female friendships, and I was so surprised to see how many books, how much research has been done recently.
And were you grateful?
I was grateful. And wait, no, it's really important because this is another example of how women are overlooked, put aside, marginalized. There's been very little research done on us, even though we've volunteered lots of times.
That's for sure.
But this is really exciting, and you all will be interested in this. The Harvard Medical School study has shown that women who have close female friendships are less likely to develop impairments, physical impairments as they age, and they are likely to be seen to be living much more vital, exciting,
And longer.
joyful lives.
We live 5 years longer than men.
I think I'd trade the years for joy. But the most important part is they found the results were so exciting and so conclusive that the researchers found that not having close female friends is detrimental to your health as much as smoking or being overweight.
Wow. And you know, and there's something else too.
I've said my part. So.
Okay, well, listen to my part, because there's an additional thing that, because they only, for years, decades, they only researched men when they were trying to understand stress. Only very recently have they researched what happens to women when we're stressed. And it turns out that when we're stressed, women, our bodies get flooded by oxytocin, which is a feel-good, calming, stress-reducing hormone, which is also is increased when we're with our women friends. You know, and I do think that's one reason why we live longer. And I feel so bad for men because they don't have that. Testosterone in men diminishes the effects of oxytocin.
Well, when you and I and Dolly made 9 to 5, we laughed so much. We found we had so much in common, and it's so different. Here she is like Hollywood royalty. I'm like a tough kid from Detroit. She's a southern kid from a poor town in Tennessee, and we found we were so in sync as women, and we laughed till we must have added at least a decade
Probably.
onto our lifespan.
I think. We sure crossed our legs a lot. if you know what I mean.
Well, I feel like I'm adding a
think we all
decade
know
right
what you
now.
mean.
As a matter of You're adding decades to our lives right now. So among the books that Jane sends us both to read on female friendship was one by a woman we admire greatly, Sister Joan Chistiter, who said about female friendship that women friends are not just a social act, they're a spiritual act. Do you think of your friends as spiritual? Do they add something spiritual to your lives?
Spiritual, I absolutely think that. And because especially people you've known a long time, people you've spent time with, I can see the spiritual essence inside them, the tenderness, the vulnerability. There's actually kind of an element of love in the relationship. I just see deeply into your soul.
Do you think that, Jane, most friendships want to go that deep?
Well, there's all kinds of friends. There's, business friends and party friends. I got a lot of those. But the oxytocin producing friendships they feel spiritual because it's a heart opening, right? We go deep, and I find that I shed tears a lot with my intimate friends. Not because I'm sad, but because I'm so touched and inspired by them.
And one of you is going to go soon.
Well, two of us are sitting here, Lily. Which one are you talking about? And I always think when women talk about their friendships that men always look a little mystified. What are the differences, in your opinion, between men friendships and women friendships?
There's a lot of difference, and I think we have to have a lot of empathy for men that they don't have what we have, which I think may be why they die sooner. I have a lot of compassion for men because women, no kidding, women's relationships, our friendships are full disclosure. We go deep. They're revelatory. We risk vulnerability. This is something men don't do, I mean, how many times have I asked you, am I doing okay? Did I really screw up there? That kind of
thing. Great.
But I mean, we ask questions like that of our women friends, and men don't. People describe women's relationships as face-to-face, whereas men's friendships are more side-by-side.
I mean, most of the time, men don't want to reveal their emotions. They want to bury deeper feelings. I mean, that's the general conventional thought. They would rather go off in their man cave and watch a game or hit golf balls or talk about sports or hunting or cars or have sex. I mean, it's just it's a more manly behavior.
You meant that they talk about sex?
I meant,
Yeah.
no,
Well,
they
we
might
talk
have
about
sex if
sex,
they
too.
could get somebody in their man cave to...
But something really, though, that I find very interesting, and again, psychologists didn't know this until relatively recently, is that men are born every bit as relational as women are. If you look at films of newborn baby boys and girls, you'll see the baby boys, just like the girls, gazing into their mother's eyes, needing that relational exchange of energy. When the mother looks away, they could see the dismay on the child. Even the boy would cry. They need relationships. So the question is, why, as they grow older, does that change? And the answer is patriarchal culture, which says to boys and young men that to be needy of relationship, to be emotional with someone is girly. That a real man is, doesn't ask directions or express a need, or, they don't go to doctors if they feel bad. They don't ask for help. There's a quote that I really like. Men fear that becoming we will erase his I, his sense of self. Whereas women's sense of self has always been kind of porous. But our we is our saving grace. It's what makes us strong. It's not that we're better than men. We just don't have our masculinity to prove.
And,
That's a Gloria Steinem quote.
No.
So we can express our humanity. I know you know who she is, but I think it's No, but it's a great quote, I think. We're not better than men. We just don't have our masculinity to prove. And that's really important.
But men are so inculcated in the culture to be comfortable in the patriarchy. And we've got to make something different happen.
Well, women's friendships are like a renewable source of power.
That's what's exciting about this subject, is because our friendships, female friendships, are just a hop to our sisterhood. And sisterhood can be a very powerful force to give the world, to make it what it should be, the things that humans desperately need.
It is why we're talking about it, because women's friendships are, as you said, Jane, a renewable source of power. So how do we use that power?
Well, women are the fastest growing demographic in the world, especially older women. And if we harness our power, we can change the world. And guess what? We need to. And we need to do it soon. And one of the things that we need to do, and we can do it as women, for one thing, we kind of set the consumer standards. We need to consume less. We in the Western world need to consume less, and when we buy things, we need to buy things that are made locally. When we buy food, we need to buy food that's grown locally. We're the ones that need to get off the grid. We need to make ourselves independent from fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel companies, the Exxons and the Shell Oils and those bad guys, because they are going to tell us that we can't do it without going back to the Stone Age. You know, that the alternatives just aren't quite there yet, and that's not true. There are countries in the world right now that are living mostly on renewable energy and doing just fine. And they tell us that if we do wean ourselves from fossil fuel, that we're going to be back in the Stone Age. And in fact, if we begin to use renewable energy and not drill in the Arctic and not drill in the Alberta tar sands, yeah, right. That we will be, there'll be more democracy and more jobs and more well-being. And it's women that are going to lead the way.
Maybe we have the momentum to start a third wave feminist movement with our sisterhood around the world, with women we don't see, women we may never meet, but we join together that way. Because, our Aristotle said most people would die without male friendships, and the operative word here was male.
Yeah.
And because they thought that friendships should be between equals, and women were not considered equal.
They didn't think we had souls.
No,
the Greeks.
Exactly. That shows you just how limited Aristotle was. And wait, no, here's the best part. It's like, men do need women now. The planet needs women. The U.S. Constitution needs women. We are not even in the Constitution.
You're talking about the Equal Rights Amendment.
Right.
Yes.
Justice Ginsburg said something like, since every constitution that's been written since the end of World War II included a provision that made women citizens of equal stature, but ours does not. So that would be a good place to start. Very, very mild.
Right. And gender equality, it's like a tide. It would lift all boats, not just women.
Needing new role models on how to do that, how to be friends, how to think about our power in different ways as consumers, as citizens of the world. And this is what makes Jane and Lily a role model of how women can be friends for a very long time, and even if they occasionally disagree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
And finally, I am hoping that you will reach out to me. You might have an idea for a program that I can do, or we could do together. You might have a comment for me. I would love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your suggestions, how we can improve. And I think that things that are interesting to you would be great for me to know about. So here's my email. It's bonnieedes@hsl.harvard.edu. Again, that's bonnieedes@hsl.harvard.edu. And you know what? Just send me an email and say hello. That would mean a lot too. So, on behalf of me, Bonnie Edes, and your programming team here at Newbridge on the Charles, thank you for watching this segment of TED Talks. I look forward to the next time.